Hi, everyone who's just joined us. Sincere apologies that we started late today. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues with Facebook, so I hope that you've hung in there and that you're still with us. My name is Maureen, and I am Director of Interfaith Scotland. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to our Facebook Live event, The Climate Crisis Beyond the Economy. This event today is the fourth discussion in our Beyond series, which looks at the climate crisis from many different angles. So far, we have looked at the climate crisis beyond politics, the climate crisis beyond religion, and the climate crisis beyond science. And today is the climate crisis beyond the economy. This series will continue monthly right up until November, when the COP26 climate summit will be coming to Glasgow. The purpose of calling a series the Beyond series is to demonstrate that the climate crisis is beyond anything humanity has ever faced, and that we need to face the challenges as a united humanity, united across all the diverse facets of life: politics, religion, science, economics, borders, faiths, and cultures. Interfaith Scotland has made this year a year of climate action, and we hope that the action we take as an interfaith organisation will make a difference. We've developed some faith-based climate resources on our website to assist faith communities and others to take action, so please do take a look at them. Today we have three distinguished speakers: Ruth Harvey, the leader of the Iona community; Shriva Sahasranaraman, who is a faculty member in entrepreneurship and innovation at Strathclyde Business School; and Reverend Sally Foster Fulton, Head of Christian Aid Scotland. Each speaker will share their thoughts with us for around 10 minutes, and then there'll be time for a Q&A. Some questions have already been sent to us, and hopefully all of you will be able to engage with us through the chat function. So without further ado, let me please introduce our first guest speaker today, Ruth Harvey. Ruth is leader of the Iona community, a globally dispersed Christian ecumenical community working for peace and social justice, the rebuilding of community and the renewal of worship. She's a Church of Scotland minister and a Quaker, with 10 years of experience working as a mediator and facilitator for Place for Hope. Ruth brings particular experience in supporting groups to articulate their deepest concerns, and is committed to the principle that nothing about us without us is for us. She's committed to environmental justice, recognizing that the peace we pursue in the world is predicated on the justice we live out in our daily lives, including the restoring of right relationship with all living things and with the planet. So it's probably no surprise to hear that Ruth was also the co-convener of the Citizens' Assembly on Climate Change in Scotland. So without further ado, please, Ruth, we're really looking forward to what you have to share with us.
So thank you very much, Maureen, and it is just fantastic to be here, to be part of this series. I've had a quick look on your Facebook page, and it's wonderful that you are gathering and galvanizing us together in this way, looking beyond the climate crisis through the lens of science, politics, faith, and today, the economy. Now, I need to say at the very beginning that I am not an economist, neither am I an expert in climate justice. What I hope I do have to offer will be to add some value to the conversation from the perspective of my own faith-based community, the Iona community. And from that perspective, to share a bit about a just economy beyond the climate crisis. So in that sense, I think all of us, people of faith and people of no faith, have an understanding that we are part of an integrated whole, a bit like you were explaining, Maureen, that the beyondness is for us to recognize the deep connection that we have across all the boundaries that divide us. All people of goodwill, whether rooted in a faith or not, are or should be concerned about what it means to live as part of a global integrated economy of the whole of creation. So it's great to be here. I'm very interested to hear, obviously, what Srivas and Sally have to say, and then to get engaged in a conversation with those of you on the call. I'm going to say a few words about the context from which I speak, then a bit about the Iona community's approach to economic discipline. And then finally, I'm going to say a few words about moral leadership, and Scotland's Climate Assembly before handing back to Maureen. So first, a few words about context. As Maureen said, I'm a member of the Church of Scotland and also a Quaker. I already live within a mixed economy, if you like, of religious belonging. What I love about that is that while I'm a member of two different Christian denominations, and I'm a member of these human institutions, my deep belonging is not to either of those organizations, much as I love them. My deep sense of belonging is to the whole household of the world, the whole household of faith believers, of people of goodwill. But I know where I come from, and I love and respect my happenstance, but it does not define me. I feel very much at home in this interfaith context. And I've always understood my own specific faith belonging as being part of that wider ecumenical movement. I was born in Scotland. I've grown up in a Presbyterian culture. It's my thrownness, if you like, that I happen to have landed here. But my ecumenical outreach, my reaching beyond myself, will only be evidenced in how much I can actually love and dwell on my own identity in order actually to let it go and to see it flourish in the context of the other. So that's my understanding of where I come from as a person of faith, with a very clear connection to the Christian tradition, but I hope always willing to be open to the other in my midst. That ecumenical context in which I grew up, I find fascinating in terms of the etymology of the words economy and ecumenism. And I know there'll be Greek scholars amongst us here who will correct me when I'm definitely wrong, but there's something about a synergy between these words. The word economy, it strikes me, or from what I read, comes from the notion of the household. And the word ecumenism comes from the notion of the interconnectedness across the whole inhabited earth. But there is something that connects them. So, and I'm going to explore that a little bit. If the word economy, and here's just one definition, means the large set of interrelated production and consumption activities that aid in determining how scarce resources are allocated, then I can find a definition of the word ecumenical, which has a kind of parallel in it. For me, ecumenical means something like this: the large set of interconnected relationships that bind us across the globe more than divide us. So economy, about how we share and production and consumption in a way that is fair and just across the globe. Ecumenical is about how we find that and let that deep connection flourish in our interconnected relationships across the globe. In the spirit of Jo Cox, we are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. And that's not just within our human race, but across all species on the planet. Our striving for survival, for growth, for flourishing unites us as living organisms across the planet. So the yearning for deep connections across boundaries, across the oikoumene, is mirrored in the yearning for a just economy, for resources that are allocated according to need rather than greed. There are some in my religious tradition and in other religious traditions who would like to divide the spiritual from the temporal and see these as separate. I profoundly disagree. In order to be a person of faith, I absolutely must be engaged both in the world of politics and economy and in the world of faith and of reflection. Here's a short prayer by our founder, George MacLeod. He said this: "Invisible we see you, Christ, beneath us. With earthly eyes we see beneath us stones and dust and dross. But with the eye of faith we know you uphold. In all things consist and hang together. The very atom is light energy. The grass is vibrant. The rocks pulsate. All is in flux. Turn but a stone and an angel moves. Unknowable, we know you, Christ, beneath us." MacLeod was not scared to talk about the grit and the gristle of daily life, the stones and the dust and the dross, and to connect that with our faith journey. Iona, the island of Iona, is known as a thin place, and there are many of these around the world. We don't have a monopoly on that. A thin place where the space between things spiritual and things material, where things of the economy and things of the oikoumene is narrow, and that space is as thin as gossamer, according to MacLeod, as thin as a spider's web. So I approach conversations about economy from this perspective, from the perspective of integration, of wholeness, of how we manage our personal and collective households in order to serve the good of the whole inhabited earth. And I want to just say a few words about how in the Iona community we try to live this out, and we do it primarily through something called our economic discipline or our accounting process. So part of what it means to be a member of this particular community is that you have to be okay to talk about the grit and the gristle of life, and specifically to talk about your money, what you do with your money, whether you have a lot of it or whether you have very little of it. It's hard to do this. It's hard to have this conversation for many of us. And we know, though, that we're not the only ones who have these hard conversations. The notion of tithing and talking about money is common across many religious traditions. The process in the Iona community, however, ends up with us spelling out in some detail how we first of all agree what are our essential outgoings. And then we agree what we do with 10% of that which is left over, our disposable income. But in the process, of course, while agreeing this detail, we have to talk about and talk plainly about what we do with all of the wealth that we have, like I said, whether we have a lot or whether we have very little. And we know as an organisation that we cannot ask our members to tithe in this way without conversely collectively accounting for the way we invest and divest and spend our collective money as an organisation for the good of all. The personal is always political. This means we try to bank and invest ethically, we support agencies and movements that campaign for economic justice for the poorest, and we try to remain alert to systems of economic justice around the globe. The personal is always political. This is what we call our economic discipline. And I want just to read to you briefly a few words that help me understand where this came from. The Iona community, since its inception in 1938, has been concerned with the necessity of finding some new form of economic discipline. As the community's primary task was in terms of the church's mission to people in industry, and as that task was so soon seen against the background of a world war, it will easily be realized that this question of Christian economic discipline came to assume an even greater importance as the years passed. For to those who are convinced that their lives are economically determined, it's no use saying that one does not live by bread alone, unless we ourselves are truly seeking first the kingdom of God, that great wholeness that we seek. This was seen as both a crucial problem for the church today, and first of all, as a problem to be dealt with in our own backyard, in our own fellowship. The community would not claim to have found the way. All we can claim is to be more than ever convinced that the way towards economic justice must be found. These words were written by Ralph Morton in 1951 in a book called The Household Faith. These words ring true for me today as we try to understand how our personal decisions about our economy, our household, impact the whole inhabited earth. So I want to move to my last little chunk, and then I'm going to close and hand back to Maureen. The last little focus I wanted to bring was from my experience within Scotland's Climate Assembly, and specifically to ask a question about leadership in that context, which was one of the briefings that Maureen was asking us to consider. For me, it was an incredible privilege to be part of the Scotland's Climate Assembly in the role of co-convener. This was an event held solely online over 7 weekends from November last year through till March this year. The 100 citizens who were selected for this assembly were selected in terms of demography and a whole range of other issues in order to be sure that they represented the people of Scotland. They received expert input over 7 weekends. They received professional facilitation, which allowed them to have really robust and yet compassionate conversations about the grit and the gristle, the stuff of life. And the key question for them was, how do we share the Earth's resources in a fair and effective way for the good of all, not just for the good of the people of Scotland, but for the good of all. How do we galvanize ourselves on a personal, collective, and political basis to ensure a just economy? They came up with 19 goals, substantiated by around about 90 specific recommendations. You may have seen the initial report. It's going to be launched towards the end of June in its entirety. These are bold and brave, and I have to say, fairly impatient goals and recommendations. And it remains to be seen now how the new Scottish Parliament picks them up and actions them. In the words of Ross Greer, who was one of the first contributors to this Beyond series, he said this: "Targets don't mean very much unless you follow through with actions." I entirely agree, Ross. And so it's over to you and your parliamentarian friends to make sure that these bold and brave goals and recommendations hit the road in Scotland for the sake of us all. So the question really is, how do we harness that big public energy that we saw in the Citizens' Assembly process? Each of us can also play our part in sharing the report when it comes through with our networks to inform and equip the people of Scotland and beyond to be the change agents we know we can be in this world. We can also lobby our parliamentarians to implement these bold changes. But the one thing that I think I wasn't necessarily expecting to see, but I saw amplified hugely across the process, was that these 100 citizens are now, of course, our leaders in the work of climate justice in Scotland. These are individuals, many of whom were experts already in this field, but some of whom came with very little knowledge or understanding of climate justice, who are now all equipped, empowered, engaged in the ethics and the justice of the climate crisis in such a way that our economy, how we consume and spend our resources, and our oikoumene, our interconnectedness across the globe, will be changed forever. I want to share, just in ending, a very short little prayer that was sent out on our social media feed today, along with a stunning photograph, if you're hungry for this kind of thing, of the sea and sky around Iona. These words sum up for me what it means to belong to God's economy, to God's household of faith. Whether you're a person of faith or not, I share these words with you. Whether you belong to this integration and reintegration journey of the whole of our lives, body, mind, and spirit. So these are some words. Bless to us, O God, the morning or the afternoon sun that is above us, the good earth that is beneath us, the friends that are around us, your image deep within us, this day which is before us. Amen. Maureen, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth. I love that, equipped, empowered and engaged. And I hope that's how we all feel as we move towards COP, equipped, empowered and engaged. Really, really important words, and everything that you said was wonderful. So thank you. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Shrivas. Dr. Shrivas is a faculty member in Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Hunter Centre for Entrepreneurship at Strathclyde Business School in Glasgow. His research and teaching focuses on the role of entrepreneurs in tackling the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He's also a volunteer priest at the Hindu Temple of Scotland. Shrivas, over to you. We're looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for the warm invite. I would like to start by giving a word of appreciation for the Interfight team in putting together this series, looking at a very important issue around climate change and its various sub-aspects. My story is basically going to be talking about two perspectives. One from the perspective of being a business school professor, kind of looking at entrepreneurship, and the other from my volunteer hat of being a priest at the Hindu Temple of Scotland in Glasgow. So I'd like to start by telling you the story of somebody called Kamala Didi. She is part of a place called West Bengal in the eastern part of India. This is a region called Sundarbans, which is a delta region. And because the delta region is kind of covered by water on all its sides. So what you see here is the picture from the Sundarbans area. Kamala Didi is from a family of 7, and though there's water around the community, there is no piped water coming to their household. So Kamala Didi has to go twice daily to a nearest water pump or a hand pump or a bore well, basically to collect water from this water source. And that's primarily the source of water for their household, for drinking and sort of cooking purposes. uh, what this sort of collection of water has been the family source of water for about more than a decade, kind of since Kamala Didi has been in this community. But sort of 3-4 years back, when Kamala Didi's husband and her son was sort of randomly checked for a health checkup by a local NGO, they found that this both of them were suffering from a very specific kind of eye disease, which was caused because of salinity in the water and because of arsenic content in the water. Kind of going back into understanding the roots for this, they figured out that the source of this contamination of salinity and arsenic content basically came from the water source, which is basically the hand pump that I was showing you before. So this happened over the last sort of decade or so for this community because there has been an increase in cyclones and floods in this region. And the cause for these increased cyclones and floods has been because of the larger climate change that we are kind of going through on. And if we look at hard statistics, we see that last 2 decades, which is since the 2000s, we see that there is twice as many or 100% more climate influenced natural disasters like cyclones and floods, which have hit the communities of Kamala Didi in the last 2 decades compared to the 2 decades before that. So this accelerated change of climate change effect on poor communities like that of Kamala Didi and others has been having a disproportionate effect, particularly on the poor communities and the fragile environments they live in. So climate change is no longer just a sort of a thing that's kind of happening in the air, but rather it's impacting individuals, communities, and their environments in a significant way, as we see in this case of Kamala Didi. And that's leading to multiple effects. So in Kamala Didi's case, it kind of led to increased health costs because they had to kind of do eye checkups and all of that. It led to them spending a lot more on health, leading to poverty-related aspects, starvation, unrest. So all these essentially make bad economic sense. So climate is not just about something in the air, it has bad economic sense directly related to it. And if you look at this change in how politics has also started looking at this, if you look at the 1992 sort of Clinton administration in the US, the sort of slogan was, it's all about the economy. But it's if you look at 2020, it's no longer just about the economy. If you look at how the messaging, be it what Ruth said in terms of how the Scottish government itself is looking at it, or be it how other global governments across the world are looking at this. Going back to the case of Kamala Didi, the solution that we are looking at, which is part of a project that I'm currently involved in, is we are looking at a decentralized solar-based water desalination technology that we are implementing in this community in West Bengal, where through solar-based desalination, we are kind of taking the river water because it's a delta region, so you can get river water which is saline. We put it through the desalination technology and you get sort of pure drinking water at the end of it. It's not just about the technology. It is not, technology is just one part. The core part is also the fact that women like Kamala Didi are being empowered as distribution agents in this system so that they take the ownership of these community-based solutions to get the water, distribute it to households, and it becomes a source of revenue for them in that process. So through a simple decentralized solution which uses local resources and local talent and human resource to deliver it, we are having multiple wins. There is the health win in the sense that it's no longer sort of saline or sort of contaminated water that the households drink. It's pure drinking water. Women in the household are being empowered as distribution agents, so there's an economic element to them. Women no longer need to go to the hand pump like Kamala Didi had to do it like twice daily for about 2 hours daily. She can now spend that time at home doing other productive activities, which makes economic sense to the community. And the source of water is made through solar-based and using water from the nearby rivers, which is anyway saline. So it's environmentally friendly in the whole process. So we have multiple wins: environmental win, a health win, and an economic win through these decentralized community-based solutions. Now, kind of shifting tracks from my business school hat to put on the hat from my Hindu Temple of Scotland volunteering as a priest role. If you look at the Hindu faith and its practices, we have a strong sense of reverence that is attached to Mother Earth and gods and goddesses being worshipped in the form of river and earth. If you look at how we call Earth, we call Earth as Bhu Ma Devi. In Sanskrit, it means goddess Mother Earth. So there's a sense of reverence that is attached to goddess Earth in terms of how we respect and value its resources. Similarly, when we look at, say, water bodies, for instance, a classic example is that of the river Ganges, which starts from the Himalayas and kind of goes through different parts of northern part of India. And every day in the evening, there is something called Ganga Aarti, which is the photo that you see on the screen now, which is a form of worship that's being done in temples through which the river Ganga flows through. And we kind of river it as a sort of a goddess every evening and kind of worship the river and the water body in itself. Similarly, trees and animals and sort of flowers are again an integral part and parcel of worship in the Hindu religion, which again is a sense of reverence that we give to the nature and its resources. These practices of the Hindu faith has translated into personal impact for me and sort of personal practice for me. And a classic example that I want to bring in this regard is a home garden that we have at our backyard, where we have a combination of vegetables and fruits that we grow. The picture I show here is from the produce that we got last week, where we had a combination of, let's say, mangoes, bananas, spinach, a bit of green chilies, and some bitter gourds, amongst other things. So the point that I'm kind of trying to drive through this example is the fact that this is again a decentralized personal solution that we kind of have at our household, where we source our own produce for at least 2 to 3 days of in a week of our own kitchen requirements. So through this, we are ensuring that there's a economic and health component, the fact that had we sourced it from, let's say, the market, we are not like 100% sure as to whether it might have had some level of pesticide component or insecticide component in terms of maintaining it and kind of producing it, because it's our own homegrown. We kind of are sure in terms of its organic element and stuff like that. It has a clear household economic component in terms of not having to kind of buy it from the market, rather we are sourcing it from our own homes. And it again has a clear environmental component, because had we not sourced it from home, we would have had to get it from the market. And if we had to get it from the market in the local region that I am from, most of these vegetables are usually sourced from the neighboring state or from other districts. So there is an element of transportation cost that involved in sort of sourcing, transportation, all of these elements, which has a carbon footprint element to it, not to talk about like transportation costs and other costs on top of it. So through a simple home-based solution itself, we are able to do household wins in terms of economics, in terms of health, and in terms of environmental change. So simple decentralized solutions, be it at the community level, which we saw in the case of Kamala Didi, or be it household solutions, which we saw in the second story, we are able to ensure that there is a symbiotic relationship between climate and economics, so that we pave ourselves for a greener future. And that's the single line message that I want you to take away from this sort of short session from me. Thank you so much. And over to you, Maureen.
Thank you, Srivas. I love that emphasis on decentralization and local economies and people taking ownership of what's happening in their own backyard. You know, there's such a lot about, I mean, of course, governments and others have to do that, play their part too, but all of us can play a little part, or a big part, really. I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to have our third speaker now, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sally Foster Fulton, who is head of Christian Aid Scotland, an international development charity committed to working with all faiths and none to eradicate extreme poverty. Sally served as Scotland's ACT Action Climate Justice Ambassador for the Paris Climate Summit, raising awareness and action across the country ahead of the COP negotiations. She also serves on the board of Eco Congregation Scotland. Sally is firmly committed to interconnectedness. Her passion is nurturing relationships between the local, national, and global. Before taking on her role with Christian Aid, Sally served as Associate Minister at Dunblane Cathedral and convener of the Church and Society Council for the Church of Scotland, facilitating interface between the Church and wider civic society. Sally is author of 3 books of reflections, prayers, and worship resources, and contributes widely to collected works and periodicals. She's also married to Stuart, and they have 2 daughters, Alex and Gracie. Over to you, Sally.
Okay. Thanks so much, Maureen. Can everyone hear my mute button has decided to be very unhelpful today. No, it is an absolute joy to be here, to be with you, and I have really enjoyed hearing from Ruth and Shribas, and look forward to having those conversations. I'll try to keep my my thoughts brief so that we can have plenty of time for conversation. But I wanted to start with a short reflection that for me kind of sums up why I think climate justice is so important and why we have to do this together. So I'm going to invite you to join me in a short reflection. And I'd ask you just to call to mind somebody that you love, one person that you love. And you can close your eyes if you want to and imagine. Imagine the shape of her eyes, or the curve of his smile, or the sound of their laughter. Call to mind the way he smells, the way she feels, or that look they give you that says, I've had just about enough. If you can hold that face, that feeling, that love, then consider this. 100 trillion cells, 7 million years of evolution, 40 weeks gestation, years of love and lessons and laughter, tears no doubt too, have gone into that one person you brought to mind who holds your heart. What a miracle. Now consider this. Our beautiful planet home holds over 7 billion souls. Every single one a unique, one-off, never to be repeated ever creation of God. There are over 7 billion of us. And behind every number is someone's name. For every statistic, there's a story, a dream, a purpose. So what if when we're asked where we're from, our first thought isn't Edinburgh, Glasgow, South Carolina, or Scotland? But I'm a citizen of this planet Earth. I'm part of a global neighborhood, intricately interrelated, indivisible. We are one family, as vast as the ocean and as intimate as a face, a smell, a touch, a look, or a feeling. I wanted to break down my thinking into 3 spaces. What does our faith or belief system say about others? What does our faith or belief system say about our environment? And what does our faith or belief system say about our approach? What are we going to do? So what does our faith or belief system say about others? And Ruth has already used that word ecumenical, part of the whole inhabited earth. That's who we are. And for me, I think that is one of the strengths of our faith and belief systems, that recognition that we are not on our own, that we do not live in our own tiny bubble, and that what we do and do not do impacts sisters and brothers of which we are a part. There is a phrase in African, Ubuntu. It comes from Africa, and it means our futures are bound up in each other. No them or us, there is only us. I think in this world today, we sometimes lose sight of that. And faith and belief bring us back to that important understanding that there is no them and us. There is only us. I went to a faith and belief conference, and this was years ago, but it was at the Conforti system, at the Conforti Institute. And it was a faith and belief conference that included Interfaith Scotland's Catholic Church, Church of Scotland, all ecumenical bodies, and also the Secular Society and the Humanist Society. And the very beginning was quite catchy. And then we looked up at what we were asked to be there for, and the model and the theme of that workshop and that retreat was, we have the world in common. And we were invited to put down the baggage that that makes us different, which is fine. Welcome to the human race. And also then to say, we have the world in common. So as people of different faiths and beliefs across Scotland, how are we going to respond? So I think one of the things that we need to be able to do is remind ourselves of that very important thing. In Christian Aid, we have been grappling with some dividing lines, and I want to call them out. One of the things that we experience, and has been something over the last year that has really lit the touch paper and I think resonated with so many people, is Black Lives Matter. I think honestly, if we look at our colonial and neo-colonial history, then we have not lived that out well. And when we say Black Lives Matter, and we look at that history and the way that our economic system still imposes itself on countries in the global South, then we have to call out that in our actions, Black lives matter, but not as much as white ones do. And that has to shift. Communities in the global South are at the forefront of solutions. They are leapfrogging our dirty footprints in regards to renewable energy. And we are asking them to be resilient and to adapt. And sometimes I think that's quite an audacious thing for us in the countries that have most to do with climate change to be imposing on countries that aren't. We have got to change that balance. And again, that is part of how we see each other as human beings and sisters and brothers. So how we see one another. Does our faith and belief system bring us round, we are one? Or does it say, if you don't agree with me, you are less than? Because that is a very dangerous precedent. It's a very dangerous understanding. We in different faith and belief groups have the opportunity to say no, not in our name, not in our understanding. No them and us, just us. What does our faith and belief system say about our environment? Well, from a Christian perspective, there are two stories in the Old Testament, and I'm not talking as just a Christian or a practicing Christian. In our sacred text, in Genesis, there are two different creation stories and the way that we see them. One, I think, has had its day, to be quite honest, that understanding. And one, I think we need to pick up and say, okay, how do we unpack this? One is that we have dominion over the earth, that we are in charge, and the earth is here for us to do what we want with. That's a damaging theological approach. The other says that we are servants of. We are part of the earth, and we have been placed here in that story of Genesis, in that myth. We were placed here as human beings to serve the world and each other. I love the idea we use too often that our children are going to inherit the earth from us. Actually, we borrowed it from them. Now, my grandmother used to say, if you borrow something, you give it back in better condition than you got it in. So again, how do we do that? How do we say we are servants of one another? And the most fragile are the people being hit hardest right now by climate change. And a step past that is the people who are not even here yet. And we're taking up their space before they even get here. So what does our faith and belief system say about our approach to the environment? Is it a gift that we share with others and preserve, or do we get to do what we want with it? We push for that second space. And what does your faith and belief system say about your response? Well, it's important that we live out what we say. And so I will go into the economy, because how we invest our money says an awful lot about what is important to us. Three things that Christian Aid are pushing for in the approach to COP are loss and damage, adaptation and resilience, and renewable energy access for everyone. Loss and damage. At the Paris Agreement, countries around the world committed to amounts of money to help with loss and damage in countries who are struggling because of climate change. We also agreed to amounts of money, nationally determined contributions that would talk about adaptation and resilience and invest in that. Not one country so far has lived up to those promises. We need to hold ourselves to account. How do we expect to move forward if we won't put our money where our morals are? Renewable energy. The time has come to make a significant, immediate shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy for everyone's sake. We talk about the global vaccine for COVID and saying that until everyone is safe, no one is safe. The same applies to renewable energy. If we continue to abuse the earth, all of us will suffer. No one is safe, and this is serious. So what does your faith and belief system say about your response? For me, it very much has to say, we're going to put our money where our morals are. And we are not going to expect that those with the least have to contribute the most. I really look forward to the conversation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Sally. Again, another wonderful presentation from our panelists. And I really like the put your money where your morals are. That's quite, I like that. Put your money where your morals are. I mean, that's really going to stay with me. And I hope it'll stay with everyone else too. We have had some questions already sent, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat with Parna. So any of our guests who've joined us, and I know there's quite a number have already joined us, please feel free to send questions. But the ones that have been pre-sent to us, I'll begin with a question for Shrivas, if that's all right. Shrivas, how can governments and other national climate-based organisations facilitate the decentralised solutions that you spoke about?
Very interesting question, Maureen. So I think the key thing would be to have incentive mechanisms that will kind of facilitate these decentralized solutions, right? A classic example which has been quite popular and successful, especially in the global south, has been sort of incentives around rooftop solar and things like that. So it's sort of decentralized energy solutions for home and rooftops and stuff. In some cases, they allow you to kind of feed the energy back to the main grid. So there's something called feed-in tariff to kind of make money out of it and stuff like that. So that's been a good incentive mechanism for decentralized solutions, especially around energy. The other thing where I think governments and climate organizations could come in could be, as Ruth was saying, right? So the component around training for communities and the sort of champions within those communities to develop these community-based models or decentralized models and kind of work and run with them in that sense. So I think what the climate agreement discussion that Ruth was part of seems to be the direction in which we should go in terms of facilitating these training mechanisms at a decentralized community level thing. The third thing which I kind of learned from the project that I was involved in West Bengal was that we need to kind of combine the sort of technology element to the decentralization to the ownership component within the community. So unless the communities at the ground level take the ownership and run with it and kind of make it self-sustainable, one-time aid is probably not the way forward. The sort of localized ownership, maintenance, sustenance, and sort of a business component around it for maintaining it is the way forward in terms of how we think about decentralized solutions. And here again, governments and climate change organizations could really help both in terms of funding and practice and training. And universities like us could kind of help with business models like support and distribution support and stuff like that.
Thank you. I'm noticing Sally nodding her head, and I thought maybe, Sally, you might want to have a few words to say about how governments and other national climate-based organisations can facilitate that decentralised solution. And particularly through KrishnAid, you're seeing that possibly at a global level.
I was just saying amen to Shrivas over and over again as he spoke, because he's absolutely spot on. It is that assets-based approach and investing in the local In regards to renewable energy, one of the real strengths of that is it does not require that massive infrastructure, but can be put in there locally so that it's a localized solution that is renewable rather than having to create this huge infrastructure that in itself takes up a lot of environmental activity and has a huge carbon footprint. So being able to do that localized work. It's also about empowering communities to make up their own minds about what is needed in those spaces. So it's that support and coming alongside rather than imposing a solution from one space onto another community. Another thing we can do as international development agencies and government is promote that leverage and scale. So if an idea works, then support it to evolve and adapt itself to other places. I'll give a very quick example, and for those I can't see, if you've heard this one before, apologies, but it's such a good one. We had a very tiny, in Christian Aid, solar oven project in the Amazon basin in Bolivia. The solar ovens had worked very well in La Paz and El Alto in the higher areas. Would it work in the Amazon basin? We had a tiny community who risked their food. They risked everything. For 6 months, they piloted this project. It grew from 6 families in a village to over 240 participants across villages. The team in Malawi heard about it, went over, bought it back to Malawi, it skipped to Kenya. So this one project, giving that leverage and scale, moves into very different places. That's the kind of ingenuity and innovation that we need to be pushing in order to respond to this climate crisis, because all of these innovations make a difference. We also need to be holding ourselves accountable legislatively. I know we talked about how our religious faith and our belief systems can impact. I think we also, though, as an outliving of that, need to say we also need to give it some teeth and legislate some of this stuff so that there are boundaries that are not crossed.
Thank you both very much for that, for those responses. They're practical and sensible, seems to me, and absolutely necessary and vital. Actually, Ruth, because you're a leader of a community, if you like, the Iona community, one of the questions that's come in just sort of led me straight to you in a way, and that was, has COVID shifted the climate crisis as a priority for your particular community? Has the climate crisis slipped off the agenda because the pandemic has slipped up the agenda, or are you managing to look at both? Or how does your community respond?
So, I think the answer is that the climate justice agenda has been there for a while and is still strongly in front of us. And I think I would say within the Iona community has reasserted and refocused us in new ways. And I'll give you a couple of examples, very practical. So we call ourselves a global community. We are a global community, but we tend not to always be able to meet together because we are spread across the globe. Well, now we've been having gatherings that have broken down barriers. So people have been Zooming together from all over the globe, and we've had a greater sense of who we are globally without having to travel in the air or to cross the seas in any other way. And I think, it would be naive of me to say that electronic communication is carbon neutral. There is a cost to this kind of communication, and it's perhaps hidden. And I think there'll be some research coming out very soon, presumably after all this electronic communication, which will show how these forms of communication are discriminatory for many, and are also that there is a carbon cost in our electronic communications. However, we have discovered that we don't need to travel the world in order to create community. We do need and miss each other's company, physical, but we've discovered that there is an intimacy that can be evolved online. That's a very practical and kind of a very practical response. I think the more significant response from my own community in this conversation would be to say that we have always had a concern for the stewarding of the earth, to go back to the Hebrew scriptures that Sally was quoting, that rather than dominion over, stewarding with. But we have recently relaunched our common concern networks, one of which is focused entirely on the environment. And so because of lockdown and because we've been able to meet more frequently on Zoom, this group has taken the issue of climate justice by the scruff of the neck and is meeting monthly over the internet, is producing a fantastic resource on living faithfully in creation, which is full of essays and liturgies around creation and climate justice, and has increased the knowledge of members of the Iona community about the crisis in ways that I don't think we could ever have achieved if we'd been relying on meeting in person. So we have a long way to go. You know, we need to be, we're reopening Iona Abbey in a couple of weeks' time. It has much more eco-friendly heating systems. We're working closely with the island of Iona on a new ground source heat pump system for the whole island economy. So we have a long way to go, but I don't think the pandemic has slowed down our engagement. My hope is, and my evidence in the ground was it's sharpened the knowledge and the understanding of the real crisis that we're all in, and the connectedness which will be part of the solution to this global crisis.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ruth. And actual fact, that has prompted one of our viewers to ask a question. And I think I might perhaps ask it of Shrivas, because our viewers may not know that Shrivas and his wife Aparna are currently stranded in India, although their home is in Scotland. So I guess the global pandemic has impacted on you quite significantly, and we're very concerned across the globe about the rise in cases as well. I just want to acknowledge that. So Shrivas, if I could ask a question of you, could I ask the speakers, is there any evidence to say that the current pandemic is actually trending the world towards being more environmentally friendly?
Very interesting question. I mean, I think the way I am sort of personally seeing this is like there is definitely the element around, let's say, us cutting down on cost around travel and all of the carbon footprint, pollution, greenhouse gas emission, all of those things. There's that component definitely that's sort of inbuilt in the fact that we probably aren't kind of traveling that much. And there was these images that were kind of coming up of satellite images showing how less smoky different parts of the global south are when the total lockdown happened last year and stuff like that. So there is that component that's probably directly there. But in terms of an overall agenda, I think it could kind of play out both ways. I mean, so given there is, let's say, an increased stress on COVID, as you was kind of saying in the previous point, like because the agenda is more on that, health might, let's say, take priority over a lot of other things. So that is something which I'm not totally sure as to how it might play out in the long run. But then given the increased sense on health, given that climate is sort of indirectly or directly in most cases linked to health, it might have a spill-on effect given the global health focus and the fact that cleaner environments make you more healthy and all of these. So I think it could play out in a positive way, but then we kind of need to see how it will play out in the long run in that sense.
Thank you, Shrivas. We're actually coming towards the end. It's passed so quickly. I mean, we did start slightly late. So I'm going to take I suppose, the chair's privilege, if you like, and just mention something that I think maybe would be towards an answer for. It was someone called Srihari that I know very well, actually, who sent in that particular question. There's an interesting book I've been reading called Positive Hope. And in this book, it talks about 3 narratives that are running at the moment. One is business as usual. Let's just go back to the way things have always been when we come out of this pandemic, because that's the way we like it. And it's business as usual, which I guess is a whole economic thing, you know, the consumerism. Let's get back to the shops, back to the pubs, back to the parties. And that's not going to do the environment any good. There's a second narrative, which is what the author of Positive Hope is called the Great Unraveling. Everything's falling to pieces anyway. So what can I do about it? I'm so insignificant. Let's just bury my head in the sand and do nothing, because it's a great unraveling. It's all falling to pieces. I can't do anything about it. That's not going to help either. But the third narrative, and I hope that all those listening and all of us would be leaning towards this one, which is the great turning. that perhaps things like the pandemic, the growing awareness of the climate crisis, our growing awareness of our hugely interconnectedness that perhaps this pandemic more than anything has ever shown us, is going to be the precedent of a great turning, and that humanity will turn to some really, really innovative and great solutions to the crisis that we're facing. So we've come to the end of our time together. I want to say thank you so much, Ruth, Sally, Shrivas. I have really enjoyed this afternoon and really enjoyed all that you had to share with us. And thank you all that have joined us on Facebook Live. Thank you for your questions. And please join us every month for our future Facebook Lives. The next one's going to be during Scottish Refugee Week, which is the climate crisis beyond borders. So please do join us for that. And thank you so much. And we'll see you again soon, I hope.